Clark Gable and Carole Lombard were the embodiment of a Hollywood couple. They both represented youth, passion, and success.
They were two of the most beautiful people in Hollywood, and they were married, and they had this supposed idyllic life. So I think that they epitomize the glamour of a lost time, like a pre-World War II innocence.
Carole Lombard was the queen of American comedy. Added to her flamboyant beauty was a scathing humor and an unbridled fantasy. Clark Gable was the typical seducer, robust and dark, but also reassuring and protective. His name remains forever linked to Gone with the Wind. But Clark Gable was far from predisposed to glamour.
Clark Gable, one of the biggest stars that Hollywood ever produced, was actually a product of Cadiz, Ohio. His father was an oil wildcatter, and he used to drag his son out into the fields, and they would work fitting pipe for oil rigs, and he'd get covered with dirt and grime and oil, and he hated that lifestyle. He started going to the theater a couple times and thought it seemed magical because it was so different from the life that he knew.
By 17 years old, when he was finished with school, he started to seriously want to become an actor. He worked a long time as an actor on the road. Many of them went on the road. They were in stock companies, and they did this, they did everything. They built sets. He loved to do all the mechanics and build things and use his hands.
He was traveling with them, and he was in Portland, Oregon, and he met Josephine Dillon, who was a local woman, almost 20 years older than him, who was starting a business as an acting coach. She actually was the first one to start to try to develop Gable into an actor because he had no acting talent. He admitted that he didn't.
He was like a farm boy that she was going to transpose into something different, something more presentable, particularly for the stage. And she did this. She had his teeth changed and fixed. She trained his voice to be more of a low-pitched voice. And she trained his hair because he had these ears that stuck out so much. So she trained the hair to kind of cover the ears a little bit.
And he ended up marrying her. And she supported him and got him jobs. And she actually took him to Hollywood in the early 20s, in 1924.
Strangely enough, Hollywood did not see the appeal of Clark Gable the first time he came through. And he actually, there's a few movies where they say you can see him as an extra, way, way back in the background, you know, the 1300th spear carrier from the left or something like that.
Born 7 years after Clark Gable, Jane Alice Peters, the future Carole Lombard, was the youngest child of 3.
From what I've read with her relationship with her brothers is that that's how she made them teach her all the profanity that they knew. So when she became an actress, that was how she protected herself. That she could act tough with all the guys so that they maybe wouldn't try any fast things on her. She was born in Indiana, but moved to Los Angeles by the time I think she was 9, so I think she's more of a California girl.
In Los Angeles, the motion picture industry was in full swing in the 1920s. Scouted on the street, the young girl debuted in A Perfect Crime.
She was 12 or 13 when she made these films with Alan Dwan, and she showed promise. She was getting more parts, but somewhere in her teen years, she got into this bad accident that ended up disfiguring, well, not disfiguring, but glass shrouded on her face, which just sounds like a nightmare for an actress. So then Fox dropped her.
Carole Lombard found refuge in The Bathing Beauties of Mack Sennett.
Mack Sennett was kind of the king of American comedy, of the silent Hollywood industry. But what Carole Lombard learned with him, I think, was the physical essence of comedy and not being afraid to use your body and gesticulations, the essence of slapstick.
I think that sharpened her skills, but I think they were already there. You know, I think she was a funny, vivacious, really lively girl whose personality just filled any room she walked into. And I think Sennett took advantage of that. And I don't think there was very much he could teach her.
Having not succeeded in Hollywood, Clark Gable was back on the road. He ended up being part of a theater company in Texas, and there, in 1926, an encounter changed his life.
He was quite kind of a local heartthrob and kind of a matinee idol to the theater goers in Houston. And he caught the eye of Rhea Langham, who was a very wealthy divorcee who had 3 kids, but she became obsessed with him. She was exactly like Josephine Dillon. She was 21 years older than he was. She was reasonably attractive, but she had what Clark Gable needed. She had unlimited resources. She was very wealthy, and she paid for everything.
Clark Gable married Rhea Langham, who gave him another opportunity to try his luck in Hollywood.
In 1930, she financed a play in LA called The Last Mile. Several studios came to look at him because he was getting a lot of press for being the next stage star.
Clark Gable came really close to getting cast in Little Caesar. Apparently, Jack Warner saw the screen test footage that they took of him, and he could not understand what they saw in this kid. He said he looked like a taxi with both doors wide open. He was talking about his big ears. So Clark Gable missed out by this much on becoming a big star at Warner Brothers.
But it was actually Ida Koverman, who was Meyer's secretary, who first decided that he should be a star. She was very important to Meyer, and she pushed MGM to go after him.
The trouble with MGM during that period is all their leading men were older. They were stage players that they brought in from New York, and they really didn't have any young, virile, hunky leading men types. And the leading men that they did have were kind of a little bit effeminate. They were kind of out of the school of drawing room comedies of the period. And so they were the sort of men that would open doors and kiss ladies' hands. And Gable, in spite of the fact that he did have stage training, was first and foremost a rough and tumble Midwesterner. He did a movie called The Painted Desert with William Boyd, Hopalong Cassidy, and you could already tell that this kid had something.
Miss, I'm from Montana. I'm headed New Mexico way. What was your name in Montana? Brett. Same as here.
He has so much more charisma and so much more animal magnetism than anyone else in the movie. And you know, MGM knew how to funnel that. They knew how to tap it, and they had the resources in order to bring those qualities to the forefront. And they could do that better than any other studio.
So the first thing they did was they changed his entire persona. They put him out as a huge outdoorsman, a sportsman, a hunter, a man's man. Though Gable had never hunted, he didn't know how to ride a horse. He had no interest in that at all.
He started actually doing it because they took photographs of him doing these pursuits. And he discovered he really did like hunting and fishing. So it's kind of the first example of a movie star becoming what the studio manufactured, like Clark Gable becoming Clark Gable. He wasn't what they said he was, but he became, through trial and error, everything that Clark Gable supposedly epitomized.
The transition to talkies also marked a new beginning for Carole Lombard.
I think she was still relatively new to the craft, and she had a great voice, and the studios needed new faces, new voices, so she fit that bill.
What's the matter, Whitey?
You keep away from that kid, understand?
What do you mean?
You heard me. Keep away from that girl. She's a nice girl.
Well, gee whiz, I didn't say she wasn't, did I?
Never mind the stalling. You do what I tell you. Keep away from her.
Carole Lombard kind of crept up on people. They seemed to see her around a bit, but you know, she worked in little short subjects and supporting parts and things like that, and she sparkled in all of them.
Sparks that Paramount didn't take long to notice. In 1930, they signed Carole Lombard to a standard 7-year exclusive contract.
And she signed it, as any aspiring actress who wanted steady employment would at the height of the Depression. She was just grateful to have this regular gig with Paramount. Was the second best studio in town. If you weren't going to work at MGM, but you wanted to be at a glitzy studio that had a good reputation, you'd be at Paramount.
Paramount was Carole's home studio, but you know, you get the impression they didn't really know what to do with her either. They never really built a campaign to turn Carole Lombard into a star. Carole Lombard became a star because of two factors. One of them was Carole Lombard, and the other was the American people who fell in love with her before the studios ever did.
Safety Numbers establishes her persona as, I think, Paramount wanted to make it the orchid lady, very glamorous, clothes horse. She had the super platinum hair. At this point in her life, she's really a serious actress as a glamour icon.
She had a strong personality, had vulnerability, but she was like a woman on her own, you know what I mean? And she wasn't dependent on other people. That's the feeling I get in all of her roles.
In search of a new cinematic couple, Paramount paired up Carole Lombard and William Powell, who was an increasingly valued asset to the studio in Man of the World.
Powell was really maybe a different type of movie star in terms of his upbringing off-screen. He was intellectual, really well-read, enjoyed culture. There's a big age difference. He liked how she liked to party. She liked to have fun. She could swear and drink as much as he could.
It's kind of funny, sometimes you mix these two disparate elements that don't seem like they work, like very sophisticated, very dry, very droll leading man with this firecracker of a leading lady. That's a combination where you would not think that those two would have chemistry. But you know, they did. They had chemistry on screen, and they had chemistry in real life as well. Carole Lombard and William Powell, they actually married, and that always surprises people. Probably surprised them as well. It's one of these cases of opposites kind of attracting.
Meanwhile, Clark Gable was still married to Rhea Langham, but he became known for his extramarital affairs, notably with Joan Crawford, the MGM superstar with whom he shot a total of 6 films.
Kiss me, please.
hear anything?
Not a thing.
Nice work.
He just physically could not say no to women. He never could. At MGM, he was known to have bedded or tried to bed every major actress at the studio.
I remember Joan Crawford once said that when Clark Gable walked into a room, you could hear his balls clacking together. Possessed was the first movie that Gable did with Joan Crawford, and they were like two animals in a cage. Man, you can see it from the moment they come on screen.
But it was a problem for MGM at the time because Joan Crawford was married to Douglas Fairbanks. So those would have been serious problems if they had come out.
The studio was very upset about this. Louis B. Mayer was always trying to settle things so the public doesn't get wind that people are living out of sin, in sin, I should say.
Eventually, they had to forbid him from seeing her. They had to completely keep them apart.
MGM was so furious that it sublet Clark Gable to another studio.
Typically, anytime Gable was loaned out, it was punishment. It was punishment for something. He was frequently loaned out because of his woman problems.
Heartbreaker on the screen and on the street, Clark Gable thereafter starred in Paramount's No Man of Her Own, opposite a certain Carole Lombard.
Carole Lombard and Dorothy McHale permeate loveliness and romance in a drama abounding with emotion. No Man of Her Own, a dilemma every girl understands.
People think about Gable and Lombard as one of the great screen couples, but they only made one movie together. It's a cute little romantic comedy, but you don't really see the sort of Titanic sparks that you would assume would be evident in one of the great romantic affairs of the 20th century.
They assumed a tone between them that was much more playful than seductive.
She brought a ham to the set and put his name, put it in his seat, because he was such a ham, because she thought he was such a ham actor. And a joke may have been lost to him, but they definitely didn't have a romantic connection whatsoever.
At that time, he liked her a lot, but she was not interested. She was married at that time to William Powell.
However, the relationship between Carole Lombard and William Powell soon deteriorated.
The trouble is that opposites don't always attract for long. And their marriage didn't last very long. I think they realized it was kind of a mistake.
They clashed a little bit because I don't think she really wanted to be molded into the wife that he would like. She wanted to be herself. And she was the consummate party girl. I mean, she was the hostess with the mostess in 1930s Hollywood. So she had no interest in quieting down in that realm, but also her career. She wanted to work. She didn't want to live in this sequestered domestic life with William Powell.
Will you let me do something if I ask you?
What do you want to do?
Wipe.
Oh, all right. You can tell me all about your trip.
Oh, you won't get mad?
Why should I?
Because every place I went, everybody was Godfrey.
You see, you helped me to find myself, and I'm very grateful.
You'd make a wonderful husband.
I'm afraid not.
They divorced, but they actually stayed friends, and they continued to work together, and they continued to consult each other and talk to each other. And it was, I think they kind of look back on their marriage as kind of a ridiculous joke.
Clark Gable, meanwhile, emerged as the new sex symbol. He first starred in Red Dust alongside Jean Harlow. Then in Frank Capra's It Happened One Night. But once again, due to his escapades, he was loaned out to another studio, this time Columbia.
It Happened One Night was one of these lucky accidents. We should all be so lucky to have accidents like that. And nobody thought it was going to work. Nobody wanted to be in it. Harry Cohen, the head president of Columbia, didn't particularly want to make it. Capra didn't really have a reputation for romantic comedies then, even though the phrase romantic comedy in some ways was invented for that movie. So it was kind of something no one had ever did before.
Do you mind if I try?
You? Don't make me laugh.
Oh, you're such a smart Alex. Nobody knows anything but you. I'll stop a car and I won't use my thumb.
What are you going to do?
The system on my own.
But this was very important for Clark Gable because in the film, certain taboos were broken. And in the film, he takes his shirt off. And people look and see he's not wearing an undershirt. And people went crazy over this because the whole undershirt market in the country took a drop. Men didn't want to wear an undershirt. They thought it was sexier not to wear the undershirt. So this brought the world attention to Clark Gable. After it happened one night, women were just enthralled by his sexuality. They just loved it because he was natural.
And then, of course, it happened one night. It went on to become the first picture to ever sweep all 5 of the major Academy Awards. Gable took home his only Oscar for It Happened One Night.
Under the heading of the most outstanding male actor for 1934, it gives me the greatest pleasure to present this new figure to you.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. However, I do want to take this opportunity of expressing my thanks and sincere gratitude to Mr. Frank Capra, the director of It Happened One Night.
That same year, in 1934, Carole Lombard gained huge success with Howard Hawks' 20th Century, a turning point in the history of Hollywood comedy.
20th Century is one of the, what we would call now screwball comedy. And it's the birth of that genre, which is really about the battle of the sexes. And in that film, it's between Barrymore and Lombard.
By definition, a screwball comedy is kind of a movie where people are unrestrained and wacky, and they cause wacky scenarios and wacky situations to happen because they're so unrestrained. Quintessential screwball comedies involve kind of a staid world and a staid person that gets involved with somebody who's completely unhinged and causes chaos and causes ridiculous events to happen in that person's life.
Does the traffic always smell like this? Look! Oh! Take her down quick. Oh, all you had to do was to turn off the juice as soon as the time was up. Oh, I thought you could do that, for gosh sake. Oh! Is something the matter?
The screwball comedy, in pushing the emphasis on dialogue and the word, ironically created really strong, smart, savvy women on screen. And this is where Lombard really excels and becomes one of the top screwball comedians. And now there's this new niche that's created for her. Her real essence off screen was perfect for this genre.
Ladies and gentlemen, announcing the battle of the century. Carole Lombard versus Frederick March in Nothing Sacred.
Yeah. Let me sock you just once on the jaw, and I don't care what happens.
Carole Lombard, at least for me, has always been the girl next door that's never really the girl next door. You know, she's the sort of girl we wish would move in next door to us. You know, she's the sort of person that basically starts a party just by walking into the room. And when she leaves the room, she kind of takes the party with her. So in a real sense, ever since Carole Lombard left the room, the party's never been quite the same, has it?
When William Powell asked for a divorce, Carole Lombard found comfort in the arms of Russ Columbo.
She was head over heels in love with this singer, Russ Columbo, who I guess appeared in a couple Hollywood films as a crooner, but he died.
Columbo died tragically. He was visiting a friend who was actually a photographer named Lansing Brown. And Lansing Brown was showing him a Civil War artifact, a pistol. The gun went off and struck Columbo in the head, and he died instantly.
She was devastated and was in mourning and kind of secluded a little bit from the party scene, which alarmed some of her friends.
I think if Clark Gable had not come along, Russ Columbo would have been the love of Carol's life.
May I?
Yeah, sure.
Clark Gable remained a lady killer, but his escapades on the set of Call of the Wild this time had strenuous consequences.
I wouldn't presume to teach you feminine psychology, but I might add, very humbly, of course,
Yeah.
that if a woman is asked to do something, she's more apt to obey than when she's commanded.
He actually had a child out of wedlock with this beautiful Loretta Young. I mean, I cannot tell you how beautiful she was at that time. Obviously, he was enthralled with her.
I wish you hadn't.
Why not?
Oh, I hadn't let myself think about us. I didn't dare.
Why?
I don't know. But I've had some sort of a strange premonition.
The studios were absolutely terrified that it would come out that they had this love child.
She refused an abortion, so the Loretta Young, Clark Gable child problem was perhaps the most Machiavellian process that they ever undertook. It was fascinating what they did.
She left Hollywood and went to Missouri and had the child secretly, and then gave the child to an orphanage on condition, and she could later come to the orphanage and adopt it and pretend to adopt it. And that's what happened.
"20 months later, Loretta Young visited an orphanage and on the spur of the moment decided to adopt one of them, her daughter, with Clark Gable.
The young girl later became an actress under the name of Judy Lewis and found out the truth about her father.
My friend Judy went to her mother and said, "Is this true? Is this truly true?" And her mother looked at her and said, "Yes, you are my sin." Judy arranged to meet Clark Gable once on a movie set, and he said he was very happy to meet her. He'd heard about her for years. Clark Gable felt very bitterly that Loretta Young did not permit him to have any contact with Judy throughout her childhood.
Clark Gable and Carole Lombard met again in January 1936 at the Mayfair Ball, an annual event for Californian socialites. 4 years after No Man of Her Own, but this time lucky.
When they finally felt, we have a lot in common. It wasn't just this hot relationship that all of a sudden popped up. It's a matter of years that they were developing this. And that's why their marriage would be so strong. That's why they felt that was the love of their lives.
He was taken with her vivaciousness, her bravado. I mean, she was masculine and I mean, she was the epitome of femininity, and she was known for dressing well and being presented well and a fashion icon. But yet, you know, what came out of her mouth was not what you would expect a woman to say, especially in the 1930s America.
She swore like a truck driver, and it turned out that eventually that was kind of the woman that he decided he liked. He didn't know he liked that type of woman at the time because he felt like he was looking for refinement, but he was a rascal, he was a scoundrel.
Only Clark Gable was still officially married to Rhea Langham. Clark and Carole had to be discreet in order to keep seeing each other.
They would meet at hotels. They would meet at beach houses that were owned by their friends in Malibu. They would meet at Carol's house, and Gable used to have to sneak in there every night to visit her. And he literally would sneak in there by crawling through the backyards to get into the house.
It was an extramarital affair for Gable. At the time, he had the support of MGM and their publicity department that was run by Howard Strickling, which would make sure that no one knew about their affair.
The gossip columnists in the papers in LA were all aware of exactly what was going on with Lombard and Gable. They just never wrote about it because they were under the control of the studios.
Carole Lombard didn't have the power of MGM behind her. Some time ago, she had renegotiated her contract with Paramount and had established herself as one of the first independent stars of Hollywood. She had her own agent and worked for several studios.
By the time Gable and Lombard get together romantically, it's when she is reaching the apex of her new career as a freelancer, and she is the highest paid actor, and I say actor because she was the highest paid actor period in Hollywood, 1937, and she has approval of director and co-star, approval of her publicity campaigns, cinematographer and makeup artist and hairdresser of choice. She was a maverick.
To better manage her relationship with Clark Gable, Carole Lombard succeeded in getting on the right side of the press.
They liked her because she never refused an interview. She was always willing to talk. She was always willing to pose. Actually, a lot of publicity photos after she became a freelance artist were really accentuating her business acumen and how you see a lot of pictures of her in smart business suits on the phone behind a desk, you know, looking in control. And I posit that this is a strategy to hide or mask the affair with Gable. They're seen in public. Everyone in Hollywood knew they were together, but in the press, they're friends. You know, they're seen at the racetrack, they're seen at a party, good friends.
When it came out that Gable was in love with Carole Lombard, and they kept it a secret for as long as they could, but it was just such a good story. People were willing to forget that he was supposed to be going home to his wife every night. Clark Gable falling in love with Carole Lombard did not seem out of character. It did not seem scandalous even. It just seemed like the perfect coupling of a screen god with a screen goddess.
It starts to get a bit more loose by 1939, culminating in that famous photoplay article, Hollywood's Unmarried Husbands and Wives.
Instead of being a gossip column, the article took a position of morality, denouncing actors who lived together out of wedlock. For fear of publicly losing their virtues, MGM raised the tone and asked Clark Gable to get a divorce. But his wife, Rhea Langham, refuses.
The reason Rhea Langham refused initially to divorce Clark Gable was nothing more or less than she was angry and she wanted as much money as she could out of the divorce.
To get out of it, Clark Gable accepted a part in a film he didn't want to do.
When my father purchased the rights to the Margaret Mitchell novel, Gone with the Wind, everybody who read the book said Clark Gable should play Rhett Butler. But Gable didn't like the idea of being in what looked like a ladies' movie, a woman's movie. And he always told reporters, oh, the big star of the movie is Scarlett O'Hara. I'm just the secondary part. I mean, I only want to be in a movie where I'm in it all the way through. I don't want to be in a movie where I'm only in the last half of the movie.
It's not that easy, Scarlett. turn me out while you chased Ashley Wilkes, while you dreamed of Ashley Wilkes. This is one night you're not turning me out.
David O. Selznick and his stepfather, Louis B. Meyer, nevertheless found a foolproof argument to convince Clark Gable.
Clark Gable said, "What else are you going to do for me? You better make this worth my while. You want me to do this film?" He said, "Well, I better be paid handsomely, and you better throw in something else." What else could you throw in? And my grandfather said, "I know you need a divorce from your wife. I'll even pay for the divorce, Clark."
Just married, Hollywood's famed newlyweds, Clark Gable and Carole Lombard, arrive at her home in Bel Air after a surprise 750-mile round trip to Kingman, Arizona, where they co-starred in the climax of a real-life romance. Now, as Mr. and Mrs. Clark Gable, they hope to live happily ever after.
Married on March 29, 1939, Clark and Carole became Mr. and Mrs. Gable. But between themselves, they continued to call each other Ma and Pa.
Isn't that the most unromantic thing you could possibly call your lover is Ma and Pa? But yes, I've heard they used to call each other that. I think they just like to joke around with each other. And I think that was just part of their goofing around with each other. And I think he probably would have laughed his head off, and then probably punched you in the jaw if you said that he saw Carole Lombard as a mother figure.
I love you more than I've ever loved any woman. Kiss me once.
Clark Gable found his real-life Scarlett O'Hara. It was with Carole Lombard that he attended in Atlanta towards the end of December 1939 the premiere of Gone with the Wind, where both were welcomed as heroes.
Yes, it's the Clark Gables, just in from the coast. Charming Carole Lombard and friend husband get a mighty welcome.
All the streets of Atlanta were jammed with hundreds of thousands of people. It was a motorcade going all the way through the streets. And when it arrived at Lowe's Grand, this theater in Atlanta, there were thousands and thousands of people cheering.
Clark Gable shares the ovation as the dangerous and daring hero, Rhett Butler. They just can't get enough of the Gables.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I am here just as a spectator. I want to see Gone with the Wind the same as you do.
Someone once said that there's only two movies, Gone with the Wind and all the others. To this day, Gone with the Wind, when you adjust for inflation, is the most successful movie ever made.
At that time, Clark Gable and Carole Lombard moved to Encino, near Los Angeles, where they led a life close to nature.
She embraced that with him, and so she becomes this rugged outdoors woman as opposed to the zany, crazy party hostess that Hollywood loves. There's all these photos circulating of her with their chickens and all the animals that they had on the ranch and sitting on their jalopy truck that they bought for their fishing and camping and hunting trips. So she becomes a domestic Mrs. Gable and changes the way that they socialize to suit his preferences. But professionally, she doesn't compromise at all.
Since 1939, Europe has been at war. A woman of conviction, Carole agrees to be in To Be or Not to Be by Ernst Lubitsch, a German Jewish director based in Hollywood.
To Be or Not to Be brings you the screen's beloved star, Carole Lombard, in the kind of role that won her the applause of millions.
It's a very lightly acted, and it's a light comedy, but the tragedy is the Nazis behind the whole thing. which gives light to all of what's going on in the world at that time.
When Lubitsch greenlit that film at UA, the independent studio in Hollywood at the time, no major studio wanted to touch it because it was dealing with politics. And at the time, Hollywood didn't want to offend anyone, even if they were the Nazis, even if they weren't distributing Hollywood films in Germany anymore.
The film was barely finished when the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, sealed America's involvement in the war.
By 1942, the whole United States was mobilizing for war. And all of the stars in Hollywood would raise money for the war effort, selling bonds to buy war armaments and pay for the war effort. Carole Lombard was one of the leading war bond sellers. She would travel around the country to appear in front of thousands of people.
On January 15th, 1942, Carole Lombard participated in a fundraising in Indiana, her home state, in the northeast of the United States.
The purchase of defense bonds, which will carry us to victory. Let us all sign a pledge to buy a bond in order that we may continue to live in the land that is free. A rousing cheer that will be heard in Berlin and Tokyo. And hands up, America.
That day, Carole Lombard raised $2 million. But she was in a hurry to return to Los Angeles. Her husband was shooting with Lana Turner, and she was worried.
You know something? My nose itches.
Didn't that mean something when I was a kid?
Mm-hmm. It still does. Your nose itches, it means you're going to kiss a fool.
The story goes that he was very much in love with Carole Lombard. They had a good, compatible marriage, but that he was known, he couldn't keep out of the sack with his leading ladies on set if they offered themselves to him. And this drove Carole Lombard nuts, and she would sometimes storm onto sets when she suspected he might be sleeping with his leading lady. And so she was supposed to take a train back to California, but that would take, I think, at least 2 to 3 days. And she decided, no, I'm gonna take a plane. I gotta get back. I don't trust Gable.
The airplane that she was in was flying at a certain altitude. It was ceiling zero, meaning you couldn't see where you were going. And unfortunately, there was pilot error, is what they found out later, that the pilot didn't know what height he was. They actually just crashed right into the Sierra Mountains.
When the studio found out about the crash, Eddie Mannix called Clark Gable because they were close friends. He knew that Gable would be devastated, which he was.
And Clark Gable dropped everything. He was at his home. He dropped everything, and they went there. They went to the site of where she was killed. And there are a few pictures showing Clark Gable there. And he's like a ghost. You can see his face. It's terrible. It's pictures you don't want to see. He was in shock.
It took hours for the rescue team to access the carcass of the plane, which crashed atop the snow-capped Nevada mountains near Las Vegas. Of the 22 passengers and crew, they didn't find any survivors.
In some ways, Carole Lombard was like the first American victim of World War II, and it struck home with people. They felt like she had been fighting the good fight, and she had sacrificed herself for her government and for her people.
Poised on the ways for launching a Liberty ship that will carry to the far corners of the earth the name of a great American woman, Carole Lombard, who gave her life for her country.
As an homage to the late actress, the U.S. government named one of its warships Carole Lombard. The ship was launched in the presence of Major Clark Gable. After the death of his wife, the actor had enlisted.
He actually did fall apart. And several of his friends said, remember Carol said you should join the Army. You know, take it off your mind. So he said that is a good idea, and he joined the Army Air Corps.
Clark Gable was too old, technically. He was past the draft age. He was already in his 40s. So he didn't have to go to war, and MGM did not want their highest valued box office property marching off to death. It was a way to expound his grief, but I think he was quoted as saying to close friends, like, I'm going over there and I don't care if I come back.
He did it the hard way. He enlisted as a private and went to officer candidacy school. And even then, he could have taken the easy route. But he trained as a gunner, and he actually flew several missions. He did fly over Germany, and he was responsible for some bombing runs and some raids. It's kind of impressive.
Okay, here they are. Now it comes. The enemy pours in at you from every point on the dial.
It's another example of Clark Gable, the man, aspiring to become Clark Gable, the character, the personality. That's kind of the thing that Clark Gable would have did in a movie.
When he returned home, Clark Gable went back to the studio.
But as people noticed, he was a changed man. On top of everything, he was just the walking dead, as some people would say.
The war aged him drastically. I think that was shocking to audiences who they remembered this really suave movie star, and now he looks kind of old and tired and put on a little bit, I mean, not a lot of weight, but he just didn't look the same.
Clark Gable's immediate movies after the war were not terribly successful. I mean, they did well, but they were a little bit lackluster because I don't think his heart was really in it. And honestly, after you've seen the horrors of war and after you've been widowed, it's kind of hard to go back and fight those wars on a back lot again. It took a long time for Gable, like a lot of other veterans, to find themselves after the war.
With John Huston's The Misfits, Clark Gable nevertheless gave one of his finest performances alongside Marilyn Monroe. This would be his last film.
Choke him down, Guido! Get him! Rosalind!
Stop!
Get him!
The Misfits, he's talking about buying horses, wild horses, and turning them into dog food.
Yeah!
It shocks the audience, but at the same time, we kind of realize that he's a misfit just like those horses are. That Clark Gable, in the last part of his career, is just as much an anachronism as a wild horse is. He's kind of like he's like a man without a country.
His only country was the ranch in Encino that he once shared with Carole Lombard, and he never left it. Although he did remarry twice, first with Lady Sylvia Ashley in 1949, then with Kay Williams in 1955.
And the two women he married after her were like Lombard lookalikes. Blondes, petite, same kind of hairstyle.
Carole Lombard was the love of Gable's life. And so she was the woman that he could never have again. He was the woman he could look for and try to replace and try to possess. But he could never replace her because there was only one Carole Lombard.
Clark Gable died on November 16, 1960, of a heart attack. He was 59 years old, and his last wishes proved his loyalty to Carole Lombard.
When Clark Gable passed away, he was buried with Carole Lombard in Glendale, at Forest Lawn, Glendale. Many people wondered, well, wait a minute, he was married 2 other times and all this. That doesn't matter. So to this day, when people go there to the graveside, I mean, people smile and they think, well, they're together, you know, it is a good thing.
Unable to finish their lives together, Clark Gable and Carole Lombard are reunited together eternally. They remain the most iconic couple of the golden age of Hollywood.